Okay, everybody. A little early this morning, I'm going through part 2 of the chapter on measuring cost behavior, and I wanted to walk through with you the 3 different ways you measure cost behavior. Now, let's just stop and talk about why we measure cost behavior, because I think sometimes we get caught up in the problems and it's like, okay, this is something we have to do. But the why behind this is pretty simple. Let's say you're a manager, okay? You're trying to predict how much money you're going to have to cover payroll. All right. And you know that you have some fixed costs and some variable costs coming up, and you want to figure out, you'd like to know if you produce this many units, how much is it going to cost, so that you can figure out how much to price the unit at so that you can make sure you cover those costs. That's basically what you do. It's a predictive behavior. You're trying to decide, based on past performance, how much it's going to cost you this month. Okay, so that's the whole point of this problem, and I think it's a great problem, particularly for a small business owner, someone just trying to get started out, to try to predict how much money it's going to cost them so they can make sure they price it at the right amount, or if they're pricing based on their competitors, that they do things to cut the costs so that they can make sure and make their profit, payroll, their fixed expenses, and cover all their different expenses, costs. All right, so there's 3 different methods to use. One of them is called the scatter diagram. It's a good old-fashioned plot point on your X and Y diagram. The second one is the high-low method, which is an equation, and the final one is regression. As far as measuring costs, regression is the absolute best way to do this. By far, regression is the top way for accuracy. But I'm going to show you all 3 methods based on some of the information in the book, and then you will probably see this again in your homework, so you might even want to review this video or listen to a past video so that you can make sure you get the problem right. All right, so the scatter diagram is very simple. You're just plotting points. So if we look at the data for estimating cost behavior in Exhibit 21-4, you would just do your simple X and Y axis. And remember, as we talked earlier, I wish I could write on this, the y-axis is up and down, right? And the x-axis is across. So the y-axis is always going to be your cost, and the x-axis is going to be your units produced. So let's take a look at that here, right here. See again, cost, units produced. Okay, so now that we're looking at the scatter diagram, you can see right here, you should be able from the first video to recognize this as the fixed cost. All right, and you should remember from the first video that we start at the fixed, at the very 0 point of the fixed cost, and then we plot along, right? So here again, this is our production starting at 0 plus the fixed cost, and we're just plotting along. And if you look here, kind of have to, it's a little bit of an estimate. You know, you can do it on a piece of graph paper, and they set you know, $5,000 and $10,000 increments. You'll have to set your own increments, and you can see right here, right, units produced, total cost 27,500, right, and then total cost of 21,500 right here. Okay, units produced, total cost, units produced 15,000. All right, units produced right here. And I don't know which one we're doing here, but let's see if we can find the January one here. Oh, here's March. They actually did it for us here. Let's just do this one real quick. That one's an easy one, right? 25. So here is the March one right here, 25. And then the January here, 27,500. So it's probably going to be about right here. And 21,000. This looks like this is January right here. Oh, and there's another thing. These are not in order. So March is here, January is here. Not sure which one is here, right? They're kind of all over, right? But you can see based on the plot points that they all kind of stick around this little red line right here. Not completely close, but it's pretty close. Okay, so that's what a scatter diagram does. Now, before we go on to the high-low method, I want to show you what an outlier looks like. Okay, so an outlier, this is something that's not in your book that I just think is very helpful, because we are living in a little more of a modern math society, and we're dealing with data science. So an outlier is something that's completely off the grid. Completely off the grid. So here again is another scatter graph right here. A lot plot points right here. Plot points right here going along. And then here's your outlier right here. Outlier way off the grid. Way off the grid. Okay. So there is an example of an outlier. So it's important, again, with an outlier, this is right here, way beyond the point, kind of here in the cliff notes here. So now you know, or in the outside points here. This is very important when you're looking at a scatter graph. Now, what would an outlier look like? That would be something for, let's say you have a regional manager. A regional manager, if they found a location that had a very unusual outlier, they would probably reach out to the manager and say, hey, what's going on here? What happened this month? Something happened. Did you have an unusual event? And they'd want to investigate that a little further. Okay, so now we can move on to the high-low method. And this is a little mathy, but it's not really that hard. So the high-low method basically, instead of plotting all the points, which we did in the last example, the high-low method goes and takes the highest and the lowest points and use those as a reference to build an equation of a line. Now, why would we want to use build an equation of a line? We're going to use that to predict, again, like we talked about earlier, where the line is going, like how much as we continue to produce, and what does it look like we're going to produce for months in the future based on 2 points in the line. So there is a limitation with the high-low, is the fact that we're only using the highest and the lowest points, and one of those high and lows could be an outlier, which could throw all the data off. So when you're picking the high and low points, and you're picking the highest high and the lowest low, just kind of keep that outlier thing in mind. And if you have a weird month, maybe you pick the second highest or the second lowest point. So that's something that's not in the book. That's just like kind of a real life thing. Okay, so we're going to estimate the highest and lowest volume levels. That's our step 1. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So step 1, highest and lowest volume levels. Okay, and again, these might not be the highest or the lowest of post, because again, outliers, right? So let's go back up here and look here. If we look at all the different units produced, okay, go through here, and we're just going to find the highest one, and it looks like it's going to be November. And then we're going to go and look for the lowest of lows here, and it looks like it's going to be June, okay? I'm sorry, not on the total cost. Oops, almost made a mistake. We're going to bite my tongue. Highest of highs, right? Don't look at the cost yet. Lowest of lows. Didn't mean to let my mouth stray. Okay, so that's what we've got. So that's a big gap right here. This is a huge gap. It's almost like $50,000 gap on our highs and our lows. So that's a big one. So again, I would look at that, make sure that that number looks like it's kind of in line with everything else, and it's not a really wildly large number. Like for example, if everything was 35,000 and there was only one that was 67.5, then I'd be like, But see, you can see there's some things that are closer here. October and December, August, those are all pretty close. So let's see here. Let's go down here. And again, right here, you can see that they used the 67,000 right here and the 17,500 in their change of cost. So we actually did use the same thing. I'm sorry, over their change in units. Okay, so we picked the high and low for the units. That's the first step. Okay, high and low for the units. Now we're going to move over to the cost. All right. So the cost over here, we're going to take the highest cost. I'm going to kind of look through here. Highest cost looks like it's about 29,000. Okay. And our lowest cost right here, and I had already almost picked that out. Oops. All right. It's 18,500. Okay. Right here, highest, lowest, all set to go. Okay. So we go down here. Take a look here. No, miss it. Oh, I missed one. I got one wrong. Uh-oh. Here. Let me see if I can delete that. No, I cannot. Okay, well, I'm going to go over here. I accidentally missed it. 31,000. There we go. Sorry, guys. All right, so over here, 31,000 minus 18,000 is our change in cost. So we're going to create a kind of fractional equation. We're going to take the change in the cost, which is the highest minus the lowest, divided by the change in the units, which is the highest units minus the lowest units, okay? And that's going to create a fraction, and then we're going to go ahead and calculate that fraction to get 25 cents per unit. That's the variable cost per unit. That's your variable cost per unit. So that's going to be the first part of your equation. Okay, now the next part is simply plugging in this variable cost per unit into an equation and solving for fixed cost. Okay, so that's all it is. So now that I've got my 25 cents per unit, I'm going to plug it in to an equation and multiply it by either the high, and you can do it like that, which is, you know what, let's just make it real simple. Just multiply it by the high. I don't want to make it too complicated. Pick the high point. You can pick both, but just pick the high point. I'm going to follow your book here in beginning accounting class. All right, just pick the high. So take your variable cost per unit and multiply it by the highest level of units. All right, now when you're picking it, sometimes when you are, people get confused when they get to this equation because they may have a situation where there's a high cost and a low level of units, and they get confused and go to the wrong spot, and it's kind of hard without putting this up on the board to fully explain how you can get confused. All I'm going to just tell you is when you get this part of the equation, walk up to the problem, find the variable cost per unit that you've got, and pick the highest number of units that you have from the very first part, which is right here. This is our 67 that we picked out. Okay, so follow right through, and then that'll give you an equation of adding the fixed cost to it. So you've got your variable cost figured out from here, and then you just solve for fixed cost, and now you have 14,125. And the equation is right here, 14,125 plus 25 cents per unit. 125 plus 0.25 per unit, right? And now, next month, when you go to predict how much it's going to cost for your total cost, which is a very important thing, you can figure out how many units you're going to produce, plug this in, and have a cost equation that you can use to predict how much your total expenses are going to be for that month as related to, the production. So the only problem with high-low, and they put about this in the book, is it ignores every single data except for the highest and lowest volumes. And again, if you have outliers or that sort of thing, it kind of throws everything off. All right, so regression is something that we put into Excel, and it's statistical. So that's why, again, it's a little tighter than all the other ones here. Regression is statistical, and it's in the appendix. We're not going to have it in the homework, but if you use the Excel or the least squares regression, all right, you can see that the equation that they got is a little tighter. It's 16,688 plus 0.20 per unit produced, okay, versus the 14,125. Now, why is this important? Well, it's better to do it accurate, right? So it's a little more accurate. If you're just doing a quick and dirty on a piece of paper in a business meeting and you're trying to just get a quick estimate, then use the high-low. If you're at your office and you're trying to predict for next month the actual costs, use regression. Okay, so you can see again the difference between the estimates, and then you can rewatch this video, which goes into very much good detail about high-low. You're going to need to do that. You're going to need to know how to do that for at least one of your homework problems right here. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to do, it's 14 minutes. I'm going to give you guys a break. upload this video, and then the very last video I'm going to do is contribution margin. So I hope you enjoyed high-low, and we'll be back on contribution margin, and that'll be my third video in the series. All right, have a great rest of your day, and I hope you're enjoying and having a happy Thanksgiving.